Hi class, how's it going? Mr. K here. I'm really excited to end this project with our Supreme Court case tomorrow. But first, we got to go over this last workshop that we did, early tests of the American government. Um, so let's get right into it. And then at the end of this segment, I'll give you some tips, some hints, and some things to keep in mind before we do the trial tomorrow. Task 1, you took a look at this document that basically covered Washington's first actions as president, as the first president of the United States of America. And you get down to the questions, and basically he did two things. The first, the Federal Judiciary Act of 1789. He passes this act, he presents it to Congress, Congress sends it through, and what it did is it set up the federal court system that we have today. It made the Supreme Court what it is, as the highest court in the land, and then it created these smaller appellate courts underneath it to deal with more local and smaller issues. And basically what allowed the executive branch to do is it showed that the executive branch was willing to do what it needed to do to enforce the Constitution. The court system was something that was in the Constitution, but up until '89, it wasn't really implemented. There wasn't really a structure out there. There was no courts created. There was no judges. And Washington took it upon himself to enforce this part of the Constitution and create it. So that's how it kind of allowed the executive branch to do its job. The second action, which I think is a little bit more important, is that Washington created the first cabinet. He got a bunch of advisors and created departments to help him deal with issues in the American government that he wasn't an expert on. So when economic issues arise, for example, he would come up with, he would go to his economic advisors, his Treasury Department, his Department of Commerce, and he would ask them, advice on these issues and what he should do, and they gave him input and insight. And that's something that American presidents have really used throughout, ever since Washington started. All presidents throughout our history have really utilized the cabinet. And what it does is it allows the executive branch to carry out its duties better, have specialized officials to help make decisions, really figure out the best way to enforce the laws and policies of the land. So those were the two main things that President Washington did. Second task, he took a look at that video, that really cool HBO series on Alexander Hamilton, and basically his economic plan, you should have something similar to what's in the middle of this column right now, is he wanted to consolidate all the debt of the individual states under the federal government. After the Revolutionary War especially, our country, our states, they're all extremely poor, and they don't have any money, and they have a lot of debt because they borrowed it from France and Spain. So what he wanted to do is take that debt and say, all right, you states, don't worry about it. We're going to put it under the national bank, the federal government. We're going to create a bank to kind of allow us to go into debt and to loan money out to the different states. So states, you don't worry about that. It'll be a federal government's job to worry about it. And his plan was, once he created the bank and once he put all the debt into this bank, he could slowly start to pay it back once the economy got more and more rolling. And when he does pay it back, that establishes credit. So other countries would say, wow, look at the United States. They've been around for 5 years and they were able to pay off $5 trillion in debt. Maybe we should trade with them. Maybe we should loan them money. Maybe we should interact with them in some way. They're a pretty, sovereign, independent nation. Again, they got stuff going on. They know what they're doing. That was the plan. Hamilton, Jefferson, they both conflicted on whether this was constitutional or not, and you saw it in the video. Hamilton basically believes that the implied powers of the Constitution give the federal government the right to do what is necessary and proper to carry out its functions, and in this case, a national bank. So he said if a national bank is needed for the federal government to carry out its economic responsibilities, that's what needs to happen. Conversely, Thomas Jefferson, and it's kind of ironic because both guys, they cite the same part of the Constitution as evidence for their points, but their points are completely contradicting each other. Thomas Jefferson believed that because in that part of the Constitution, it never says that the United States can create a national, or the federal government can create a national bank. Because it doesn't say that, it can't happen. It's unconstitutional. And that's kind of the platform Jefferson's on. At the end of the day, Hamilton wins the argument. They create the national bank. Eventually, later on, Andrew Jackson gets rid of it, but that's not important. What's important is that the concept of a national bank was allowed to happen. It gave power to the federal government, and it basically is going to bring us out of this economic depression that we're in after the Revolutionary War. Final task. You took a look at these three landmark Supreme Court cases. First one, Marbury versus Madison. A little bit of a complicated issue, but basically John Adams was president. In the last night before his presidency went out of office, last night he was still president of the United States. He appointed this guy, Joseph Marbury, to to this position. I forget what it was, but he appointed Joseph Marbury as part of his cabinet, and then he left office. Thomas Jefferson comes in next. He's the next president. He's like, well, I don't want this guy in my cabinet. He was like the opposite opposing party. I want James Madison. So James Madison, you're going to be the guy. Joseph Marbury gets real mad because literally the night prior, he had been given the position. So basically, there's some squabbling back and forth. Who has the position? Who doesn't? Who's right? Who's not? Why are they right? Why are they not? And it comes up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court basically takes a look at it. It takes a huge step back and says, we don't rule on these things. This isn't within the concept of what the Supreme Court does. The Supreme Court is around to declare things unconstitutional, not decide debates or squabbles within the executive branch. So we're not going to make a ruling on that. However, caveat, they decided that the Federal Judiciary Act, that one that Washington passed, this is what Marbury was using to bring his case to the Supreme Court. He was saying, it says here that blah, 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 blah. Details really aren't important, but this is why I should have the position. They declared that law, his evidence, unconstitutional. And that's the first time the Supreme Court exercised its power to do such a thing. So on one hand, the Supreme Court kind of lowered its power. And on another, it strengthened it. So it's kind of an interesting case, but it's very pivotal for the United States government going forward. McCulloch versus Maryland. Basically, so there's the state of Maryland, and they don't like the national bank that Hamilton passed, right? So they go and they try to close it. They tax it to no end. They make it pay all these major fees, and it's clearly unfair. It's clear what they're trying to do, too. The state of Maryland's just trying to force it out of business. This guy that works there, McCulloch, is like, no, I'm not going to pay dumb taxes, Maryland, because you disagree with the national bank. Take it up with the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court they took it up with, they did. They go to the Supreme Court, and McCulloch's basically saying that, you can't do that. It's a violation of the federal government because the federal government already okayed the national bank. Maryland can't be in violation of that because of the supremacy clause. The federal government takes priority over the states. And Congress agreed. They said, okay, yeah. First of all, the national bank is necessary and proper for the United States government to do its job. And number two, Maryland, you can't override and overstep your authority like that. And that's really important because it established that precedent that the federal government, what it says, trumps what the states say when it's on the same issue. And then lastly, Gibbons versus Ogden. So steamboats were how people traveled back in the day. There weren't any cars, there weren't any bikes. Steamboats on canals and on waterways. And basically, this guy, I believe that, yeah, it was Ogden. He had a monopoly from New York State that said he was the only guy that could run steamboats on waterways in New York. So canals, rivers, streams, things like that. This guy Gibbons starts operating on a waterway that is in between two states, connected New York and New Jersey. So he's like, that's not in violation of the monopoly because it has to do with interstate trade or trade between two states, not within the jurisdiction of just one. Ogden disagreed. The two argued. They go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decides that the supremacy clause, stating that the federal government's powers and legislation take priority once again over the states, is what's going to kind of rule here. And they basically said that, yeah, in the Article 1 of the Constitution, it says that the federal government has power of interstate commerce. And if that indicates that, the steamboats were going between New Jersey and New York, that falls under that category. And therefore, that monopoly that Ogden had that from New York State doesn't apply. So while they sound kind of silly, like dumb little debates, these three cases were really, really, really important in establishing kind of how we, the powers of our government and kind of how we enforce and exercise those powers. So nice job. I saw a lot of really good responses with this workshop, so that was always exciting. Few things. So you got your trial tomorrow. Number one, make sure you are dressed professionally. Suit and tie, well, not really a suit, but tie if you're a male. Female, wear nice clothing. This is a professional thing. We're going to the Albany Law Campus. Actually, we have a mock courtroom that the Albany Law students use, so we got to impress them, right? Number two, make sure you have everything printed out before we leave. The bus is going to leave here at about, I think, 11:30. Make sure you have your stuff printed out before then. And as you're finalizing your arguments tonight, make sure that you're keeping in mind those counter arguments. That's what's going to dictate the winner of this case, let me tell you guys. The judges are going to be looking at counter arguments. How well can you rebuttal? How well can you come back at them when they come at you? So be prepared for that. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm really excited for tomorrow. So we should be able to see each other then. Take it easy.